ever wondered about how the Shabbat day Kiddush and the various aspects of how it came to be? Well, that's exactly something we're going to be discussing on this 184th episode of
The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life.
L'chaim.
Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan. I'm excited to welcome back. I've lost count at this point. I don't know if it's fifth or sixth time guest. He definitely has won the lottery for most ever appearances. Six. Yep. So we've reached a half dozen appearances for Rabbi David Fried here on the Jewish Drinking Show. So first of all, welcome, Rabbi Fried.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So for those of you who have not caught yet the first 5 episodes featuring Rabbi Fried, he teaches Judaic Studies at the upper school of the Ramaz school. He is also an editor and frequent contributor at the Lehrhaus. He lives in New Jersey, the Garden State, with his wife Molly and their 3 sons, Elchanan, Saadia, and Aharon. He earned his rabbinic ordination from my alma mater, YCT Rabbinical School. So Rabbi Fried, welcome once again back to the Jewish Drinking Show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here as always.
This is actually the very first episode of the Jewish Drinking Show ever treating this. It's called in Aramaic Kiddusha Rabbah, the Great Kiddush. It's the Saturday day Kiddush. It's the first episode we've talked about because there's literally only basically one Talmudic drinking story that involves this. And we're actually going to be talking about the medieval discussions, development of practices around this practice.
Yeah, there one Gemara, as you said, and
yes.
You know, the Kiddusha Rabbah seems to be an ironic name, as we'll see when we go through that Gemara, right?
Yeah, I think it needs to be said for all of our listeners that there's certain words that terms that we use, and it doesn't matter the language. Of course, I think people familiar with the Robin Hood story know of Little John, who is the biggest character around. But I also think there's a little tongue-in-cheek situation going on. You know, I'll introduce this Talmudic drinking story. So there is a story in the Talmud of Rav Ashi visiting Mechoza. And for anybody who doesn't know, Mechoza is this suburb of Ctesiphon, which is this really great cosmopolitan city in Persia. So he visits Mechoza for Shabbat. On Shabbat day, they asked him to sanctify the Great Kiddush, this Kiddusha Rabbah, it's Aramaic, of which he had never heard. So he's a visiting scholar in residence, asked to do something drinking related. He doesn't know what this is, but they give him some wine, and he clearly I like this scene plays in my mind as he is very cautiously looking around. He just thinks to himself, I'll say Bori Prigofen because it's wine. I don't know anything else, as opposed to what is formerly known as Kiddush Hayom, the day's sanctification, which is Friday night.
He seems to be not sure, like, do they say the full Kiddush again during the day?
Right.
And so he's like, well, let me start with Bori Prigofen, and I'll see if people start drinking right afterwards. If they do, great, I know I'm done. And if not, then I'll start saying the full nighttime Kiddush again.
Right. So he
and he sees people start drinking, and he's like, oh, I guess that's it.
Yeah, actually, I think he looks over at an older fellow who starts drinking his wine, and he's like, "Okay, I've got my unlock here. It's cool." I do want to point out for the Talmud fans in the audience, there is it's interesting when we think about the inhabitants of Mechoza in anybody keeping score at home in Ta'anit or Tainus 26a, they talk about drunkenness being common amongst the inhabitants of Mechoza. So there is this possibility that when we read of this Talmudic drinking story, it could simply be that this is not some sort of rabbinically ordained practice. It's just simply they're, putting on this dress slapping this name on this wine drinking on Shabbat day. They're like, this is the great Kiddush. What's so great about it? We're having wine. Like there's nothing additional. It's literally just the same blessing for wine we use week long, all year round.
I mean, also, like, at what point in Rav Ashi's career is this happening?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, if this is older Rav Ashi coming back as a scholar in residence, this is not his first time in Mechoza.
That's a good call. I like that. Yeah. So, but he's not familiar with this Mechozan practice,
right?
And this is the first time we've read, or first and last time we read of this. And so this is it. Like there is this Talmudic drinking story about this practice called the Great Kiddush, which may or may not be some sort of tongue-in-cheek thing that these the Talmud calls them. They're like, drunkenness is very common amongst these people. And I suspect, by the way, because Mechoza is this suburb of Ctesiphon, like there's a lot of money, there's a lot of material wealth. They have what to drink. Even though this is Sasanian Persia and it's not Israel, they still have a fair amount of wine. a little foreshadowing. They have plenty of wine that they could be drinking, and it's no problem. Shabbat services in the morning are over. Hey, let's get together and let's do some drinking. It's fine.
Right, as we said, right, Kiddusha Rabbah, the great Kiddush, right, seems to be, like you said, tongue-in-cheek, because, it's really the short Kiddush. It's just B'rei Pri Hagafen, right? For anyone thinking about, the things we are, are minhag to say nowadays, various psukim before Vishamru or Zachor, Mizmor LaDavid, none of that is from the Gemara, right? And that's
right. It's not even
later. It's nice, but it's just B'rei Pri Hagafen. That's it.
Also, I don't even think that's in the time that we're talking about for our time period.
I am not aware of medieval traditions of adding those psukim. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't really looked into it when that starts.
Yeah, so we're really just talking about B'rei Pri Hagafen. These Machozen residents dressed up this wine drinking in fancy language, making it a practice. And that seems to be really it. And I think that it's also important. I'm going to definitely foreshadow here. I think it's very important as we consider the post-Talmudic life of this story, this practice, is also to consider that they're not saying this is like Kiddush. They're not saying this is Kiddush Hayom, the sanctification of day, of which there's a lot of Tannaitic and early Amoraic rules and regulations around. This is just simply, it's the great Kiddush, there's wine. That's really seems to be all there is Talmudically. That's it.
Before we get to the story, we do have a Gemara that attempts to derive from Sukkim the chiyuv to say Kiddush Bayom.
Yeah.
Right. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadosh Zachor al yayin b'knisato. Ainli ela balayla bayom minayin Talmud lomar Zachor Yom HaShabbat.
Right. Which is, by the way, the central Tannaitic piece that talks about Kiddush. Kiddusha
Biyom my mivarech Amar Rav Yehuda B'rei Pri Hagafen. So we already have, before we get to Rav Ashi in generation 6 of the Amoraim, we already have Rav Yehuda 4 generations earlier saying that you say B'rei Pri Hagafen by Yom, and
that is right. I'm going to butt in. That is technically true. Although it's not really, I think that's really the Stam doing the work here. I don't know what Rav Yehuda is actually talking about. I think he's being placed here by the Stam. They introduced the question. The Stam throws. I'm not usually one of these big people who talk about transposing, but I think this is being brought in. Otherwise, why wouldn't Rav Ashi know the answer to this? Otherwise, Rav Ashi looks like a fool if he didn't know what Rav Yehuda said a century ago.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I think this is being transposed from the Stam.
I'm not academic. I just read Gemaras.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I wanted to break in and give you a sneak peek into next week's episode on rabbinic metaphors relating to sex and sexuality and women in rabbinic literature. Here is a sneak peek into next week's episode. Here we go.
The man is drinking from a cup.
Mm-hmm.
And he shouldn't be thinking about a different cup.
Hope you enjoyed that sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Rabbi Dr. Gail Leibovitz. Now back into this episode featuring Rabbi Fried.
I think there's some good questions as we go into the medieval rabbinic normative authorities. Do the medieval rabbinic authorities leave this great Kiddush as something restricted to simply sharing the name of Kiddush with Kiddush Hayom and nothing else? Or do they expand parameters of Kiddush Hayom to also apply to the Saturday morning wine dressed up in elegant language as a Kiddush so that it is another Kiddush? So I think these are some important questions as we move forward and really look forward to these medieval rabbis and what they have to say. Our first question is this just a blessing over wine, or is this something more? So we first have this early 12th century rabbi. His name is Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, Rashbam, as he is popularly known. So he says this is about honoring Shabbat with wine, and I believe he's quoting the Gaonim. So this is really what it's about. He says it's Kavod Shabbat, it's honoring the Sabbath. And he actually says, She'ein omrim shira el al yain, that we only sing songs upon wine. Lovely.
Right. He's quoting the She'iltot, which is, I have not seen the She'iltot inside. It's hard to find things on the She'iltot, but who's the first of the commentaries on the Talmud. So very, very early, 8th century, I think. Who says basically, who takes this line from the Gemara, from a different Gemara about Ein Omrim Shira El Ayayin, we sing our songs over wine, which certainly there are many examples of that. But then he uses it to explain Kiddusha Rabbah by essentially saying that the drinking of the wine is itself a kind of shira. So, and then it parallels nighttime Kiddush, right? Nighttime Kiddush, we have an actual bracha, an actual text of Kiddush. And during the daytime, we do our shira not through words, but through drinking.
Which is a lovely approach to this Kiddusha Rabbah. So then we're going to move on, and I'm not going to read all these texts, but this one definitely bears a direct quotation. This is from, people may have heard of him. His name is Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimonides, as some people are familiar with, in the late 12th century. So he writes, mitzvah levarech al yain, it's a mitzvah to bless upon wine on the Sabbath day prior to one, and enjoying the repast and enjoying their second meal. V'zehu nikra Kiddusha Rabbah. It's called the Great Kiddush. Mavarech b'rei gafen bavad. You only bless on the wine. So you drink, of course, as a Jewish drink. So after that, you drink, and then you wash your hands, and then you have your meal. Okay, so then he goes on. So that fine, all fine so far. But then he throws in a couple of extra things. It's forbidden for someone to taste any, I assume, food or beverages prior to making this kiddush. And also this kiddush should only be in the place of the actual meal itself, which these two latter things are something that are specifically with Kiddush Hayom. They are Friday night dinners,
right.
And now
those are
he's
two
transposing
things that the Gemara discusses explicitly about Friday night Kiddush, and
right.
Yeah, the Rambam just takes them and applies them to
Saturday Kiddush,
Kiddusha Rabbah, Shabbat day Kiddush as well. The
right.
second
and
one,
also he's calling it Kiddush also.
Right. The second one we'll see no one really disagrees with, but that first one of, you can't taste anything before doing the mitzvah, right? And that's not even really a law about Kiddush per se. That's a law about mitzvot and time-bound mitzvot.
Well,
when you have a time-bound mitzvah, you don't eat before doing it.
Sort of. I mean, I don't want to totally.
There are
everything.
There are exceptions.
We're gonna see an exception or two, but he is definitely also directly taking this from Kiddush Hayom, from the Friday night Kiddush.
Yes, but I mean the point is he clearly is viewing this as, although he says it's D'Rabbanan, unlike Friday night, which is D'Oraita, but he basically sees this as a D'Rabbanan parallel to Friday night Kiddush, where all the same basic laws apply.
Right,
and which makes sense if he is holding like that same She'iltot that the Rashbam quoted. Obviously, he had not seen the Rashbam, but it is likely he would have seen the She'iltot. There is some kind of way, of praising God through the act of drinking wine, and therefore, we praise God Friday night in words. We praise God, Shabbat day through drinking wine. But it's the same basic kind of mitzvah.
It's interesting. You're like Rashbam. We don't know how much he thinks this is just like Friday night Kiddush or not. In Rashbam's view, We don't know. Rashbam is not on record about these things that the Rambam mentioned. Right. So I don't know if the Rashbam holds like the Rambam, but I'm pretty sure Rambam holds like Rashbam. Well, I definitely disagree, but I think there's three particular innovations Rambam here is introducing. The first of which is that it's just another Kiddush. It's another Kiddush. And as you pointed out, one might be D'Oraisa, one might be of a rabbinic nature. The second is it has to be in the same place as the Suda, and the third of which is that you can't consume anything prior to executing this Kiddush. So I think, because no one else has said these things before, I think he is the first to introduce these three aspects.
Yes, for sure. Right, so, he is the first to give a nafkamina of how we it's not just a conceptual question like why do we do this, how do we think about it, but like here are some practical ramifications of how we think about it.
Right. But he is not without his detractors or people who complain against him, because an older contemporary of his, I think people like to call him the Ravid, is Rabbi Avraham ben David, a late 12th century rabbi. He pushes back. I'm pretty sure this is the most significant pushback ever on what we just read. First of all, he starts off with this language of like, this is the weakest logical reasoning I've ever seen from him. And so I think for listeners out there who are not really familiar with Ravid or Rabbi Avraham ben David, he has this gloss upon the Mishnah Torah, and he writes, especially where he's disagreeing or pointing out things that contradict.
It's worth noting that like this is just how the Ravid disagrees with the Rambam.
Oh, this is common for his language.
Yeah, like
this is pretty stark.
But he's sharply worded. That's how he does things. It's like I've been learning through Rambam Yomi, and like when you come to a Ravid, you just kind of expect him to say stuff like this.
It's an old crotchety guy. Okay. Well, I love it. By the way, I think I've become a fan of this approach. I really like what he says. He's really dissatisfied with Rambam's approach here. He says they just called it the Great Kiddush and ingrained traction, but it's meaningless. He says Lufi Shikaru Uhu Kiddusha Rabbah Yatalov Enu Glum all yain. We already made Kiddush.
You're gonna make halachic ramifications out of the fact that they use the word Kiddush to describe it. Right. It's not Kiddush.
They were drinking people. What else do you expect? And I love this.
He doesn't say what he doesn't say what he says it is, and of course, we'll get to later Rishonim who try and explain him and give a positive explanation for what he thinks it is. But all he says is what he thinks it's not.
Yeah, and by the way, I love that. This is sort of where I'm at. I'm like, I'm fanboying over this.
Right. It is worth, and I think, important to note that he disagrees with the first thing the Rambam says. He disagrees with the, where did you get this prohibition of tasting before Kiddush, before Kiddusha Rabbah, right? Which I think goes with what I was saying before, that's really a thing about mitzvot, not about Kiddush per se, that it's not a mitzvah. There's no...
Yeah, right. It's a mitzvah to drink wine on a Saturday morning. Is it really?
It's not a mitzvah, right? And he doesn't say what it is, but there's no prohibition to eat before it. He doesn't argue with the Makom Suda bit. He doesn't argue that
that's
has
true.
To be place of your meal, which I think is very key when we look at the Meiri. I think it's very key to the way the Meiri explains him.
So Rabbi Fried has mentioned Rabbi Meiri, so it's Rabbi Menachem ben Shlomo HaMeiri, late 13th, really turned off into the 14th century rabbi. Do you want to take this away, this Meiri?
Yeah, I mean, so the Meiri mentions, in code, the way the Meiri does. He never mentions other Rishonim by name. He has his code names for them, but he mentions in code this debate between the Rambam and the Ravid. Mm-hmm. He comes down on the Ravid's side, and he gives an explanation so what is Kiddusha Rabbah for the Ravid? Yeah. He says it's a way to give chashivut to the
meal.
It's a way to show that this is a special meal. It's an important meal because it's a Shabbat meal, which I think that makes a lot of sense with the fact that the Ravid didn't argue on the Makom Suda, because of course it has to be Makom Suda. The whole point is it's a din in the Suda. It's about showing how important the Suda is. You can't just have it arbitrarily outside of the Suda.
Interesting. So the Suda requires the wine. You can't just be drinking wine in one place.
It's not
interesting.
For the Ravid, I mean, again, I can't say for sure, but at least, for the Meiri's explanation of the Ravid, right? It's not a mitzvah of Kiddush. It's a din in Sudat Shabbat that you have to have wine there.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on what you're saying. He says because the blessings are crowned through this great sanctification, and once it's a required blessing, which is just Bari Prigafen, it's not anything fancy, it's also called Kiddush because it was established, like you said, the purpose of honoring the day, this Kuvod Shabbat.
It's worth noting as well that the Rambam really has both ideas, because the Rambam also thinks there is a requirement that every Shabbat meal has to have wine, so much so that the Rambam says it about Shalosh. Ramaz says even Shalosh
is he, as we would say in Hebrew, Das Yachid, is he a lone individual with this idea?
Is he alone?
I don't know if there's a common...
In thinking that Shalosh requires wine?
Yeah. It's not a commonly...
It is not a commonly held position. I looked into this once. I think I did find a couple of Aharonim who agree with him, but I think he may be alone in the Rishonim.
Yeah, it definitely is a lovely idea, especially for listeners of the show who love drinking, but it's also a lot. It could be a lot of drinking throughout Shabbat. Like even the third meal, it's tough. Yeah. It's not easy.
It is still held in the Yemenite community. I was in the Yemenite home. They did have wine they did not call it Shel Shidduch, but their third Shabbat meal.
Yeah.
I cannot vouch for every single Yemenite home doing that. I should be careful not to generalize from my experience in one home.
Hello, dear listeners. It's your host, Rabbi Drew. I wanted to break in right now and just say, hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate, or watching, however you're consuming this content. And I'm always open for new ideas, both for specifically the Jewish Drinking Show, whether it's topics, whether it's guests. I'm also looking for other resources that I can provide you with in the Jewish Drinking Project more broadly. Also, I'd really like to offer you the opportunity to sponsor this work. Whether if you want to go to patreon.com/jewishdrinking, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have ideas for swag, also, please feel free to send them to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. All right, thank you so much, L'chaim, and now back into the episode.
Once again, another actually a duo, if you will, of Rishonim. So I want to quote something from Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher. So for those listening, really a turn of the 14th, early 14th century rabbi. He quotes his father. He's going to come up later again, Rabbi Asher. So that's Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel. So he says, look, my dad. So we talked about not consuming anything prior to making the Saturday morning Kiddush. He says, look, my dad, my master, my father, blessed memory, would drink water in the morning before prayer because the obligation of Kiddush had not yet taken effect until after prayer. It did not prohibit him from tasting. It hasn't applied because, and it has this Isaiah verse, you've cast me behind your back. It does not apply. In the case of water, there is no arrogance. And then he would then complete his meal and recite the blessing. So he allows for this like wiggle room where, it's not like Friday Kiddush where, this really is the unlock for all consumption. When it comes to Saturday morning, sometimes we need to hydrate before we do services.
Well, I mean, it is like Friday night Kiddush, and that his whole point is that, again, the prohibition to eat before a mitzvah doesn't take effect until you have the chiyuv to do the mitzvah.
To be in the space
so
for that.
Friday night, the sun goes down, I have a chiyuv to make Kiddush, I can't eat anything until I make Kiddush. Before the sun goes down, eat as much as you want. So his whole point is that the chiyuv for daytime Kiddush, it doesn't start when the sun comes up. It starts when you finish davening. Right? And therefore the prohibition on eating doesn't start until you have a chiyuv to do the mitzvah, which is not until davening is done, right? Now I have a separate problem, right? There's also a separate prohibition to eat before davening. But he says, but that doesn't apply to water. So water you're allowed
there's no
to have
arrogance.
before davening, and the prohibition of eating before Kiddush, which includes water, but that doesn't take effect until there's actually a chiyuv in Kiddush. So his real Kiddush here is that don't think that the chiyuv for Kiddush starts the moment the sun comes up. The chiyuv for Kiddusha Rabbah doesn't start until tefillah is over.
But also, he's not saying you can drink or eat anything. It's really just, I'll provide this exception for water. Water is one thing. That's not, wine would be outright not cool.
But meaning it's not, but it's for a different reason. If you look at what he's quoting, the reason he says you can't eat other things is because of the prohibition of eating before davening, not because of the prohibition of eating before Kiddush.
Right.
So he says the prohibition of eating before Kiddush does not apply until you're done davening. It happens to be I have another prohibition that applies. There's a prohibition of eating before davening, but that doesn't apply to water.
This really is, I think, a good. So far, this is like our intermission, so to speak. Like so far of approaching Kiddush of these medieval normative rabbinic authorities. But we're now going to go into transition of, wine's great. I think we love wine, and we've definitely read Rambam and Rashbam, and they're all talking about wine. And wine is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but not everybody always has wine all the time. So we're going to start really this second part is talking about what if you don't have wine. When we encounter these early Rishonim, these early medieval authorities, they say only to use wine for Kiddusha Rabbah. Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, he's 11th century rabbi. He talks about using wine. Also his grandson, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, Rashbam, and also Rambam, who we quoted from earlier, they all talk about wine. They don't seem to have a fail-safe. What is the plan B if you are wineless? Maybe just wine was something they had available, and it was unthinkable to be wineless.
Right. I mean, we're not just inferring from absence. Rambam and Rashbam, and I think we said Rashi also, but I didn't have a chance.
Yeah, Rashi, Rashbam, and Rambam. Yeah.
They say explicitly you can't use anything else.
Yeah, so they say just wine. Like it doesn't even cross their minds that you're going to use anything else. I did say I really appreciated Rabbi Avraham ben David's earlier approach. I loved his approach, his criticism against Rambam on the whole Kiddush question, Kiddusha Rabbah really specifically. He actually, however, and I'm distancing myself from this opinion, but he allows for Kiddush on bread. And I think he is also a Dasi Achira. He's really a singular voice in this matter. I think he allows you to do Kiddush on Shabbat day on bread.
Completely a Dasi Achira here. Right, which is interesting because we have a Gemara about doing Friday night Kiddush on bread.
And that's Rav. That sometimes Rav would do it on bread, and sometimes
Rav would do it on bread, right?
And by the way, on the next page, he was once caught making Kiddush on beer, even. So,
yeah, I mean, the Rabbeinu Tam thinks he didn't really mean it, but whatever. Like most Rishonim assume that, yeah, you could make Kiddush Friday night on bread.
By the way, Rabbeinu Tam is like super anti-bread.
Falls prey to his own to his own trap here. So Rabbi's like, well, you can make Kiddush Friday night on bread. Why not Shabbos day on bread? Like, wait a second, it's not the same thing.
I like your criticism. That's great. Fall into his own trap. That's wonderful.
But that's not why he is universally rejected, right? The reason he's universally rejected is because the Rush's argument against him, which once the Rush says it, right, it's just such a devastating argument.
Which is a great segue. So this is Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, who is a late 13th, early 14th century rabbi. He's also the Tur, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher's father. So he says a couple of different things in a couple of different places. I'm going to say the first thing, which is, he says, if you don't have any wine, then you don't do Kiddush. Just go ahead and say the blessing. And apparently this is in a teshuvah of his. However, elsewhere, Rabbi Fried...
I have not seen that teshuvah. I'm only familiar with what he says. Yeah. You showed me the Piskei Harash, which is not written by him, so I don't give that much weight. But if it's in a teshuvah, that's certainly significant. I'd have to see the teshuvah.
But either way, he's not on the bread train. He's not okay with that. But however, elsewhere he writes, he says, you know what? Maybe you could actually make Kiddush on beer. So you can make, maybe if it is Chamar Medina, tofu yoter lekadesh al pas kevash. Okay, it's better to do this on bread because of kavod Shabbat, on this honoring the Sabbath. Oh wait, no, sorry, that's the nighttime. Aval baboker yiresh yivarech al sheher koram birchas hamosa. You should actually do beer first, then bread.
Right. So there's a lot to break down here to make sense of everything you just said. So we got to go through, right? So Kamar Medina, right? Where did that come in, right? The wine of the state, the wine of the locality. So there is a Gemara that talks about using beer for Havdalah. There's a Gemara that talks about using beer for Havdalah if there's no wine available. And it says basically if it's Kamar Medina.
But by the way, I'm going to break in. It's Pesachim 107a for anyone keeping score at home.
If it is Kamar Medina, right? If it is the thing that people in that locality use instead of wine, what exactly that means is a topic for a different episode. But if it falls into that category, you are allowed to use beer for Havdalah.
And by the way, listeners and viewers can go check out episode 26 of the Jewish Drinking Show featuring Professor Jordan Rosenblum on this Talmudic drinking story about how beer became acceptable for Havdalah.
Hey there, I wanted to break in yet again. Although I asked for support in financial ways because it does cost some money to make the hosting happen and other aspects of Jewish drinking happen. So your financial support is definitely appreciated. And don't forget, you can go to jewishdrinking.com/donate. But also, another way of supporting the show and everything that Jewish Drinking does is also to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you like this content, if you like this show, maybe people you know also like it. So feel free to let them know, hey, I have this interesting episode I heard, or a few episodes, or whatever it is, or even a few clips. Feel free to share with your friends. All right, thank you so much. Now back into the show.
The Rambam and Rashbam, others among the early Rishonim, pretty much all say, yeah, it's Havdalah. That's it. Don't apply Chamar Medina to anything else. And they're basing that on the Gemara that comes right after that, where the Gemara explicitly asks, Mahu l'kadesh hashikra, can you make Kiddush on beer? And the Gemara concludes, no.
By the way, what's super fascinating about that sugya, by the way, it does what the opposite of most sugyot in the Talmud, the Prickabes of the Talmud, it goes in reverse chronology to try to answer this question.
That is always an interesting point to think about. Yeah. I did not have a chance to ponder that. So the Gemara concludes, no, you can't make Kiddush on beer. So the way the Rashbam, and I saw others quoting the Rif, learning it this way also. I didn't see it inside of the Rif, but and again, but if the Rif does learn it that way, it makes sense. That's why the Rambam learns it that way. Say basically, the Gemara's question is Mahu l'kadesh hashikra. Can you make Kiddush on beer if it's Chamar Medina? And it concludes, no. Even if it's Chamar Medina, you cannot make Kiddush on beer, and that's why the Rashbam conclude that no Kiddush on beer. Now, this is talking about Friday night Kiddush, right? It's not a sugi about Kiddusha Rabbah per se,
right?
But there's no reason to assume they would, say anything different about Kiddusha Rabbah at this point. The Rosh takes on the Rashbam's read on two grounds. He says, first of all, if you read this sugya carefully, over the course of the sugya, it actually concludes that we can use beer for neither Kiddush nor Havdalah. And so the Rosh says, well, we know from the previous sugya that our conclusion, la halacha, is you can use it for Havdalah. And so if we don't hold by the Shita in this sugya by Havdalah, we don't hold by what it says for Kiddush either.
That's true, because in the Gemara, they do talk about, they twin Kiddush and Havdalah beverages as far as acceptability.
So the Rosh says, there's a machloket in the Gemara, but the opinion that the Gemara concludes with says you can use it for Havdalah, and from there you can infer Kiddush also. The only opinion we know that says you can't use it for Kiddush also says you can't use it for Havdalah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
and now that we know we can do beer for Havdalah, then
right. That's the Rosh's argument number one.
Yeah.
Which, that is essentially still reading the sugya the same way as all the other Rishonim, that the question was about using beer in a place where it is Chamar Medina, and therefore we don't pass them like this sugya. Then he says, but I think that whole read might be wrong. He says,
who is that again?
This is still the Rosh.
Really? Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Then the Rosh says, I think that whole read is wrong. I think really the question is Mahu L'Kadesh HaShichar is asking in a place where it's not Chamar Medina. Right? And the Mahu L'Kadesh HaShichar in a place where it's not Chamar Medina. And therefore, I don't have to say we don't paskin like this sugya. We paskin like this sugya. Right? The sugya says you can't use beer for Kiddush or Havdalah in a place where it's not Chamar Medina, which is in fact how we paskin. And therefore, I have no sugya that says you can't make Kiddush on beer in a place where it is Chamar Medina.
And it's a fascinating innovation, really, because, it's funny because nowadays we're like, yeah, that totally makes sense, obviously. But he clearly was an innovative trailblazer in really bringing this from the Havdalah conversation into the Shabbat day conversation, the Kiddusha Rabbah conversation.
Right. So then transitioning to Kiddusha Rabbah. So he says, if you don't have wine Friday night, making Kiddush on bread is preferable to making Kiddush on beer, because bread you're allowed to use, might not be preferable, but you're allowed to use bread even if you have wine. Whereas beer you're only allowed to use in a place where it's Chamar Medina when you have no wine. So given the choice between bread and beer for Friday night, it's better to use bread. But now when it comes to Shabbat day, when it comes to Kiddusha Rabbah, and here's where he takes on the Ravid, and again, this argument, which is so absolutely devastating that no one even tries to defend the Ravid. Everyone just falls in line with the Rosh after this. Says, how could you use bread for Shabbat day Kiddush? There's no bracha of Kiddush Shabbat day. The bracha of Kiddush is just the Birkat Hanenin.
Yeah,
it would just be Hamotzi Lechem min Haaretz, and you're saying that anyway because you're having a Suda. So if you're doing Kiddusha Rabbah on bread like the Ravid suggests you could do, there's no Kiddush. You haven't said anything additional to what you were saying anyway. So he says Shabbat day Kiddusha Rabbah, if there's no wine, then you should do it on beer, right? If you have a glass of beer before the meal and you say a shahakal on it, now you've done something special. You've done something additional to distinguish this as Kiddusha Rabbah.
So I want to say,
saying Hamotzi anyway.
Right. I want to say two things. The first of which is what we have of this language of the Rosh of Rabbi Asher. He says the imlo came batla kiddusha yom. Then otherwise you've sort of nullified or lost out. But I really think his son has a much clearer articulation, and it's not so much in Orach Chaim 289 where I think people looking up the stuff in Orach Chaim would find, because he does very tersely say in 289, Imein lo yain yivarech al sheichar o shar mashkim. If you don't have wine, bless on beer or other beverages. But it's really in 272 he really provides a fascinating articulation. It says, in the morning meal, yoter tov l'kadesh al sheichar. It's better to bless, to sanctify upon beer. Perushu v'archa lav she'akol niyeh bivar. Okay, so you say the beer blessing. Kodem leverchas mostly. Okay, here we go. That if you just were to bless upon the bread, what is different about this meal? Manishana hasuda, whatever. This meal is it's not distinguished. Kiddush effectuates no function here. So at least do it on beer if you don't have wine. Bread's not good.
I mean, he is Right. He unpacks his father's words the way I just.
Right. And it's funny that it's actually in 272 by Friday Night Kiddush and not, he's very explicitly writing about Shabbat morning, by the way. Even it's over there. So I think anybody researching or otherwise looking into it has to do some searching and find that. Be a little ADD about it. So I think that, by the way, that articulation I think is really clear. And you mentioned the Rosh sort of destroys the Ravid's opinion, but I think this articulation by the Torah very much carries the day. It really takes up the mantle from his father, and that really, I'm pretty sure for the subsequent halakhic history for centuries and centuries, is really not carried the day, but carried eons. We also have just throwing in another Rishon. We have Magid Mishnah. It's Rabbi Vidal of Tolosa, 14th century. He also very much is not into using bread for Kiddusha Rabbah. He's very against Ravid here.
I'm sure he's a generation after the Rush. I'm sure he also took it from the Rush.
Right. So there's this very clear negative critical response against Rabbi Avraham ben David of Poskiers that this whole bread situation. Nobody's okay with that. That's not okay for Shabbat day, for this great Kiddush. You lose out, really. You lose out on this opportunity. It's not in any way different than a meal for the rest of the week. You need to do something different, whether it's wine, whether it's beer, or sha'ar mashkin, as the Torah wrote. It needs to be some other beverage, but not water. Obviously not water. Rabbi Fried, thank you so much in joining us in this conversation today. I learned a lot through this. First of all, I'm sure that the listeners and the viewers don't know the behind the scenes conversations and research and study that we put into this, but I thank you in helping really help sharpen me and my knowledge in putting this together. So thank you so much for this episode.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me.
My 100% pleasure. And since you've been here a handful of times before, this is the moment, Rabbi Fried. Is there anything you would like to promote?
Check out the Lehrhaus.com. We are one of the very few totally independent online Jewish journals. We are not beholden to any major foundations, totally funded by donations from our readers. So if you like what you read, please donate.
Amazing. All right. And on that note, I want to say L'chaim.
I am.
L'chaim.